yes, public policy has a role, but there's almost a spiritual, moral component of what men who struggle are missing and need help with. And so I want to focus on, what do we do? What are the recommendations? And in your report from Virginia, there are some concrete recommendations. So maybe just broad question first: what should other states be considering doing to help address these issues?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question, and I'm glad you started with this kind of the moral dimension of all this, because, and I'll talk through some of the sort of practical recommendations that we made, but it is important, as we've talked about earlier, these issues are as much the matter of the soul and the hearts of people as it is, hard policy recommendations. So, parents that love their kids, there's an aspect of you being the moral shepherd for your kid. Pastors, coaches, community leaders, the interpersonal relationships that you have with kids, boys and girls, can make all the difference. And there's no legislation that's going to reach all the way into those very close relationships. And I just think that it's for all of us, as we think about these issues, never forget the importance of family, mentors, coaches, religious faith, as being kind of our best defense to help young kids see what's really possible in their own lives. And it's not only for young kids, frankly, it's for people of any age, but in particular, those young people still shaping their worldview. In terms of the actual the actual components of things that we recommended, there are a mix of those things that are more targeted towards younger boys to put them on a path, and to older men who are already fathers, and things that we can do. In terms of the things that we can do for younger men, and I'll say in this instance, we practice what I'm about to preach, which is teaching the success sequence in schools. I know in places like Utah, there's already referenda to have this happen. There are a couple of other states like Tennessee are actually teaching this content. And for those of your listeners who are not familiar with the success sequence, it's a fancy title, frankly, just for data that says if a young person completes at least a high school degree, so not necessarily even college, but at least a high school degree, then they get a full-time job of any kind. So they learn the dignity and discipline of work. And then if they have children, marriage first. That series of decisions: education, work, marriage, then children. Millennials who follow that series of decisions, 97% avoid poverty. And the vast majority enter the middle class or beyond. And so we think that that's just crucial information that young people deserve to know and be taught. I mean, the schools I lead are in the Soundview section of the Bronx. The non-marital birth rate is 85%. So nearly 9 in 10 babies are born outside of marriage. So our students aren't seeing a lot of examples of people who followed this particular sequence. And so we think it's very, very important to let young people know. And of course, it's 97% avoidance of poverty. It's not 100%. There's no guarantee in life, right? But what are the likely rewards or consequences associated with different series of life decisions? And we want young people to know that. The other thing I think that's important, that was also in the report, is that the second component of the success sequence, so there's education and then there's work. When it comes to work, one of the things we're finding, and again, we do this at our own high school in the Bronx, is that we've created multiple pathways so that a student can pursue apprenticeships in high school. So right now, at the end of sophomore year, our students can choose biomedical science, computer science / cybersecurity, or early childhood development / Montessori. So our juniors and seniors are now doing real world apprenticeships where once a week they go out. In the case of the early childhood development students, they're actually working in a pre-K Montessori classroom, where at the end of their senior year, they will have a credential that could allow them to become an assistant teacher in a Montessori classroom. And the idea is that we want to remove this notion that college has to be the only immediate option after high school. And there's a ton of data that says when students do that, they earn a credential, they earn money for a few years right out of high school. It's not that they never go to college, they actually do, but their completion rates are higher, their level of actually their marriageability is much higher. So as governors are thinking about this, the idea of creating more what I call multiple pathways in secondary education, where students can pursue, a traditional high school degree, and they can have apprenticeships or externships that either allow them to earn money or earn experience. But the key is they earn a credential that has labor market value, I think is very, very important. The other thing, I don't think we specified it as much in the report, but school choice actually is fundamental to this whole enterprise. If we really want to have more young kids on a pathway to, all the sort of the passage into young adulthood, we gotta better prepare them. I looked at some data the other day as relates to Black students. In 2015, when you looked at data, only 18% of Black fourth graders were reading at grade level, according to the National Assessment for Educational Progress. When you looked at that same cohort in 2019 of now Black eighth graders, only 15% were reading at proficiency levels in 2019. And then when you look at that same cohort in 2023, by almost all indicators, less than 20% of Black students were reading at grade level. How can we expect our students to flourish as they enter young adulthood when they're coming out of our K-12 system so unprepared? And I gave you an example just focused on Black students. Across the board, only about 33, 34, 35, 36% of all kids are reading at proficiency levels based on the nation's report card. So there are many, we could have a whole conversation just about that, but certainly one intervention that would help more kids is just giving parents the power to choose a great school for their kids. So those are just some of the recommendations that I think are worth any governor really looking at their state and seeing where do we stack up in these areas.
Ian, some of the other things you mentioned in the report that I want to ask you to expand on a little bit. If I were to just kind of run down the list, you recommend things like making schools more boy-friendly in various ways, creating a positive culture of fatherhood. You mentioned earlier this idea of a PSA campaign around that. You've mentioned limiting access to pornography through things like age verification laws on the tech side. But a couple that I really want to pinpoint, reviving civic efforts to promote pro-social masculinity. And if I can focus on that one for a minute, because here in Utah, Sutherland, we put out a survey of national men to kind of ask questions in these areas, and anywhere from about 1 in 5 to 1 in 3 of American men are struggling in various domains, depending on the nature of the question. But one of the ones that stood out to me the most is this finding in our survey data that about 36% of American men say they're struggling to understand their place in their community, in their society, in broader society. And I think so many of these conversations come back to this purpose, this meaning, this ethereal spiritual thing of what am I supposed to be as a man today? And that these men who struggle feel adrift in that sense. So that stood out to me, this idea of civic efforts to promote pro-social masculinity. So my question for you is, one, what is pro-social masculinity today? And two, how can we leverage civic institutions to restore it?
Wow. How much time do we have? I mean, what's interesting about the question, first of all, it's a very profound question, very topical. And I think one of the challenges is that somehow what I might, now describe as, so pro-social masculinity has somehow been put in the category of toxic masculinity. Like the things that we've expected men to be, providers for their family, or caretakers, just being the man of the house, has somehow been negatively framed. And perhaps it's because you've got some of these really outliers like the Andrew Tates of the world, who really, in my view, go way too far. But somehow that's all been kind of lumped together, where now men think, I don't know, maybe I should just be a womanizer, or I can go on to these dating devices and just swipe, find someone and have transactional relationships with women. So all of these things are, as you mentioned, we do include a recommendation to, address the pornography consumption issue. At the least, can we have age verification issues so that 13-year-old boys aren't seeing very distorted images about what it means to have a relationship with women? So all of those things fall into what I view are toxic masculinity, but we can't let that diminish the importance of what you're calling, quote unquote, pro-social masculinity. And there, I think it's what we've known for eons about being a good father, being a good husband. We often talk about fatherhood, and I wish we had equal conversations about the concept of husbandhood. Because there's a whole thing related to husbandhood that we should really ensure our young men understand before we get to fatherhood. And these were the kinds of things that I think were taken for granted decades ago about, and again, there has to be a way to have this conversation where saying, there were traditional roles for men, there were traditional roles for women, but to have that conversation without implying that somehow we have to go back to the dark ages, right? But that there are ways of being that are healthy, and especially for children to see how grown-ups are behaving. So I would say pro-social masculinity are the tried and true things around, being a good person, being a good man, respecting women. It's almost obvious, but in the absence in our society today, where there's kind of sometimes, I don't know, moral relativism, where there are no absolutes, there are some absolutes around being a good person, being a good father, being a good husband, and taking care of your family. That's the kind of masculinity I hope young men aspire to become.
Thanks for watching that clip of Defending Ideas. For the full conversation, click the link in the description, and make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your shows.